There was a specific documented Oval Office moment when this war was over. Not theoretically over, not diplomatically possible, actually over. Iran's negotiators, through the back channels that run between Washington and Tehran through Pakistan, told Trump's team for words, "You're getting the uranium." Not someday, not in principle, not as a framework for further discussion. You are getting it. The 440 kilograms of highly enriched uranium, the material sitting 30% of the way between civilian nuclear fuel and a weapon capable of destroying a city. Iran's negotiators said Washington could have it. There was one condition: you're going to have to come and take it out. Fine. Washington said fine. Us teams would go in and remove it. The deal was effectively done. The most dangerous material on Earth, in the hands of the most sanctioned regime on Earth, after 73 days of war, was going to leave Iran. And then Iran changed its mind. Trump told reporters from the Oval Office on Monday, they did 2 days ago, but they changed their mind because they didn't put it in the paper. They didn't put it in the paper. For words that may be the most consequential for words spoken in this entire war. Because what those 4 words mean is this: there was a moment when peace was real, when the uranium was promised, when the deal was one signature away, and Iran walked away from it. Not because Washington's terms were impossible, not because the framework was unworkable, because somebody in Tehran, one of the lunatics, as Trump would say minutes later, decided that putting it in writing was one step too far. And now Trump is meeting with generals. Welcome to Dr. Elena.Murphy. If you're new here, this channel is your deep dive source for the military, geopolitical, and economic stories reshaping the world. And what you are about to hear is the most complete breakdown of the most tragic day of this entire war. The uranium that was promised and taken back, the moment Trump described. The ceasefire as a patient with a 1% chance of survival. The Chinese MANPAD missiles being secretly routed through third countries to rearm Iran right now. The Council on Foreign Relations assessment published this morning that China has the upper hand at tomorrow's Beijing summit, and why the man flying to Beijing tomorrow. To negotiate from strength is, according to his own intelligence community, negotiating from weakness. Make sure you are subscribed right now. Tap that button. Today is the day this war changed, and where it goes from here will be determined in the next 72 hours. Let's go. Let's start with the uranium, because that story, verified from Trump's own Oval Office statement to CNN's pool reporters on Monday, is the tragedy at the center of everything else that happened today. And to understand why Iran walking back the uranium commitment is so catastrophic, you need to understand what that 440 kilograms actually represents. Iran currently holds an estimated 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity. Weapons-grade uranium requires 90% enrichment. Iran is 2/3 of the way there. At the production rate Iran's centrifuges were running before the February 28 strikes, Iranian scientists could produce enough 90% enriched material for a nuclear device within weeks of making the political decision to do so. That is not a theoretical future threat, that is a current capability gap measured in weeks. Trump said of the uranium, there will be no enrichment of uranium, and the United States will, working with Iran, dig up and remove all of the deeply buried nuclear dust. That was his stated goal, his red line. The thing he said at the beginning of this war that made the entire conflict comprehensible, not regime change, not territorial concessions. The uranium, remove the uranium, end the war. And Iran's negotiators told him he was getting it, and then they didn't put it in writing. Trump on Monday, moments before he said the ceasefire was on massive life support and compared it to a patient with a 1% chance of surviving, signaled to Fox News that he was still focused on a diplomatic solution. They're going to fold, Trump said. I will deal with them until they make a deal. Hold those two statements together. The ceasefire has a 1% chance of surviving, and they're going to fold. That is the mind of a man who believes he is winning a war of attrition while watching the evidence of that war's progress evaporate in real time. Trump has set deadlines for Iran to agree or face bombing on at least 5 separate occasions since March. Each time he pulled back. CNN's analysis noted that most times Trump said the deadline was being relaxed because a deal could be imminent, but by the 5th time he didn't even bother to claim that, and he explicitly said there was no deadline. 5 deadlines, 5 extensions. The CIA says Iran has 4 more months of runway, and the uranium that was verbally promised was not put in writing. Now let me show you what Trump did next. Because after calling the ceasefire a patient on life support and the Iranian proposal a piece of garbage, Trump said something in the Oval Office that is the most revealing geopolitical analysis any US president has offered publicly in this war. You have the moderates and you have the lunatics, and I think the moderates are more respected. The lunatics want to fight till the end, Trump told reporters. The moderates are dying to make a deal. And then you have the lunatics, and I guess they're a little bit afraid of the lunatics. Moderates and lunatics. The moderates are dying to make a deal. The lunatics want to fight to the end. The moderates are afraid of the lunatics. Let me translate what Trump just told the world in those 3 sentences. He is saying the Iranian government is not a unified actor. It is a fractured system in which the foreign ministry and diplomatic track the moderates, in his framing, want a deal badly enough to have verbally committed to uranium transfer, and the URG hardliners. The lunatics overruled them. The moderates put the uranium offer on the table. The lunatics pulled it off. Trump had earlier said the ceasefire was extended specifically because Tehran's government was seriously fractured, and said the extension would continue until such time as Iran's leaders and representatives submit a unified proposal. A unified proposal. That is what has never arrived. Not because Iran does not want a deal, but because the faction that wants a deal and the faction that controls the weapons are different factions. And the faction that controls the weapons keeps pulling back whatever the faction that controls the diplomacy agrees to. If you're finding this breakdown valuable, make sure you are subscribed to Dr. Elena Murphy right now and have your notifications turned on. We cover this story every day with the depth it demands. Hit subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Now let me take you to the story that every analysis of the Beijing summit is missing. Because what the Council on Foreign Relations published this morning about tomorrow's Trump-Xi meeting should make every American deeply uncomfortable about what Trump is walking into. The Council on Foreign Relations analysis, published May 10th, states directly, at the Trump-Xi summit, China will have the upper hand. Let me show you why that assessment is correct, and why it has everything to do with Iran. It is awkward that, as the leaders meet, the U.S. Navy is blockading the Strait of Hormuz and intercepting tankers bound for China, Iran's largest crude buyer. Meanwhile, Beijing is providing political and possibly intelligence support to Tehran and could be seeking to renew flows of drone parts, air defense equipment, and missiles. Washington and Beijing have escalated a quiet sanctions war over Iran in the weeks leading up to the summit, turning the Middle East conflict into another front in their widening geopolitical rivalry. Beijing has refused to bend. Earlier this month, China deployed its blocking statute for the first time, ordering Chinese firms to ignore US sanctions on 5 refineries accused of buying Iranian crude. The blocking statute, for the first time in Chinese legal history, Beijing has formally instructed its companies to break American law, not to comply quietly and hope for leniency, to formally, institutionally, legally ignore US sanctions as a matter of Chinese government policy. That is not a country preparing to help Washington pressure. Iran. That is a country that has decided the cost of American sanctions compliance now exceeds the cost of open defiance. And then there is the intelligence, the story that CNN broke from 3 sources with knowledge of US intelligence assessments, and that the Council on Foreign Relations has now confirmed in its summit analysis. US intelligence indicates that China is preparing to deliver new air defense systems to Iran within the next few weeks, according to 3 people familiar with recent intelligence assessments. The systems Beijing is preparing to transfer are shoulder-fired anti-air missile systems known as MANPADs, 2 of the sources told CNN there. Are indications that Beijing is working to route the shipments through third countries to mask their true origin. Through third countries, to mask their origin. China is not publicly delivering weapons to Iran. It is building a covert supply chain routing MANPADs through intermediary nations so that when those weapons end up in URG hands, there is plausible deniability about where they came from. Shipping MANPADs to Iran would mark an escalation in China's support for the country since the US and Israel launched their joint military campaign in February. Chinese companies have continued to sell the Iranian-sanctioned dual-use technology that enables Tehran to keep building weapons and enhance its navigation systems, but the Chinese government directly transferring weapons systems would mark a new level of assistance. A new level of assistance, while ceasefire negotiations are ongoing, while Trump is flying to Beijing tomorrow to ask Xi Jinping for help pressuring Iran, while Washington is sanctioning Chinese satellite companies for helping Iran target American soldiers. One of the sources familiar with the intelligence said China sees no real strategic value in overtly entering the conflict. Instead, Beijing is trying to position itself as a continued friend to Iran, whose oil it heavily depends upon, while remaining outwardly neutral so it can maintain deniability after the war is over. Outwardly neutral, covertly supplying, that is China's Iran strategy in 7 words. And Trump is flying to Beijing tomorrow to sit across from the architect of that strategy and ask him to use his influence to bring Iran to the table. When CNN asked Trump about the intelligence, Trump said, "If China does that, China will have big problems, okay? Big problems." That is the president's public warning to a country whose leader he is meeting tomorrow, whose companies he sanctioned this week, and whose blocking statute just told Washington its sanctions are legally irrelevant in Chinese jurisdiction. Axios described this week as Iran, China and AI collide in Trump's legacy-defining week, and noted that Trump is set to arrive in Beijing having received Iran's unacceptable proposal, leaving him days to recalibrate, escalate, or arrive in Beijing empty-handed. Empty-handed. That is the phrase no president wants attached to a state visit to the world's second-largest economy. And right now, with the uranium promise walked back, with the ceasefire on life support, with the proposal called a piece of garbage, Trump's Beijing hand is thinner than anyone in Washington anticipated 6 weeks ago. When the ceasefire was announced, now let me show you what Washington did simultaneously, because on the same day Trump declared the ceasefire on life support, his administration deployed to economic weapons that tell you exactly how serious this crisis has become. The Trump administration offered a reward of up to $15 million for information leading to the disruption of the financial mechanisms of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The bounty covers information on URG revenue sources, front companies, sanctions evasion, financial transfers to terrorist proxies, and financial institutions. Doing business with the URG. $15 million on a sitting government's military arm, while simultaneously negotiating with that government. The $15 million bounty is not a military tool. It is an intelligence collection mechanism designed to map every financial nerve of the URG in real time, so that if and when the ceasefire collapses and strikes, Washington knows exactly which financial arteries to sever first. The Trump administration also imposed sanctions on 12 companies and individuals it says are helping facilitate the sale and shipment of oil from Iran to China. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said the agency will continue to cut the Iranian regime off from the financial networks it uses to carry out terrorist acts. The announcement came a day before Trump's scheduled departure for Beijing. The day before Beijing, 12 new sanctions on China-linked entities. The day before Trump flies to China for a summit where China's Iran policy is the central agenda item. The Ceasefire noted that China's Trump-era precedent where Beijing successfully beat back unprecedented tariff escalation by wielding rare earth minerals and magnets. Forcing Trump to fold rather than escalate means she enters this summit with documented evidence that Washington blinks under economic pressure. China knows Trump folds. It proved it in the trade war. It is now testing whether the same dynamic holds in the Iran war. Now let me show you the CNN analysis that cuts through all the daily noise and tells you what this ceasefire actually was and why that truth matters more than any single day's headlines. CNN's political analysis concluded, more than a month after the ceasefire began, there is little evidence it's producing an environment for a deal. It mostly seems to have given to sides that would prefer not to fight right now an excuse not to fight. That's more helpful to Iran, though, which has telegraphed its willingness to dig in for a prolonged conflict. For Trump administration officials, that risks looking like they're being willingly strung along while they try to figure out a face-saving exit from a potential quagmire. Being willingly strung along, that is CNN's assessment, that is not a partisan attack, that is the clinical observation of what happens when one side sets 5 deadlines and walks back all 5. The ceasefire did not produce a deal. It produced a pause that benefited the side with more time, and the CIA says that side has for more months. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said Iranian attacks on US ships and the way didn't clear the threshold for violating the ceasefire. He depicted Project Freedom as a separate operation. Top US defense officials seemed to be saying some Iranian attacks on the United States were fair game. Later that day, Trump ended Project Freedom. Despite Hegseth, Rubio, and Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman General Dan Kane all opposing the decision, Trump ended Project Freedom against the advice of his defense secretary, his Secretary of State, and his Joint Chiefs Chairman, in military command terms, that is the commander-in-chief overruling his entire chain of command to make a unilateral diplomatic concession to a country he was calling a piece of garbage on the same day. 3 scenarios define the next 72 hours, and each one leads somewhere no one in Washington planned to be when this war began on February 28. Scenario 1. The Beijing summit produces a China-mediated Iran breakthrough. Xi Jinping, who played a key role in convincing Iran to accept the April 8 ceasefire according to Wikipedia's documented timeline, uses the summit to deliver a private ultimatum to Iran through channels that do not require public face loss. China stops the MANPAD shipment. China pressures Iran's moderates to put the uranium commitment in writing. Trump leaves Beijing able to say the summit produced results. Iran's foreign ministry submits a modified proposal within 72 hours. The uranium is scheduled for removal. The ceasefire holds. Scenario 2. Trump arrives empty-handed and Beijing extracts concessions on trade. The Ceasefire analysis states that she's confidence further strengthened when he successfully beat back Trump's 140% tariff escalation. When she threatened to restrict rare earth flows in April and October 2025, Trump folded rather than credibly threaten escalation. Under this scenario, she offers vague promises to pressure Iran in exchange for concrete trade concessions, tariff reductions, technology access, semiconductor export relaxation. Trump accepts the trade because his domestic political base is watching gas prices, not geopolitical architecture. Iran gets nothing changed. The covert weapons pipeline continues. The ceasefire survives on life support through the summer. Scenario 3. The generals' meeting produces a strike authorization. Trump said he planned to meet with a large group of generals concerning the absolutely lovely country of Iran. The CENTCOM plan for a second phase of Operation Epic Fury deeper infrastructure targets, higher intensity than the first wave has been confirmed by multiple sources. If the Beijing summit produces nothing on Iran, if she tells Trump China will not stop the MANPAD delivery, if Iran's hardliners continue to overrule the moderates on uranium, Trump faces a choice between accepting that the ceasefire is a managed stalemate or authorizing the strikes his generals have been preparing. Since April, under this scenario, the ceasefire ends formally before the end of May. The second phase begins at what Trump himself promised would be a much higher level and intensity than before. What we can say with certainty today, every word verified, every source named, is this: Iran verbally agreed to hand over its uranium, then changed its mind because they didn't put it in writing. Trump called the ceasefire a patient with a 1% chance of survival. He called the proposal a piece of garbage. He described Iran as having moderates dying to make a deal and lunatics who are afraid of no one. He met with a large group of generals. The State Department put a $15 million bounty on the URG's financial network. Treasury sanctioned 12 more China-linked entities the day before the Beijing summit. US intelligence confirmed China is routing MANPAD missiles to Iran through third countries to mask their origin. China deployed its blocking statute for the first time in its legal history, ordering its firms to ignore American sanctions. The Council on Foreign Relations says China has the upper hand at tomorrow's summit, and Trump is flying to Beijing tonight to meet the leader of the country that is simultaneously buying Iran's oil, routing weapons to Iran's military, helping Iran target American soldiers through satellite companies, and telling its banks to break US law. Day 73. The uranium was promised. It was taken back because it was never put in paper. The ceasefire is on life support. The generals have been briefed, and tomorrow, the leader of the free world flies to Beijing to negotiate with the leader of the country that is secretly rearming the enemy he has been trying to defeat for 73 days. Iran said yes to peace, then changed its mind, and somewhere in a conference room in the White House, a large group of generals is now deciding what comes next. Subscribe to Dr. Elena.Murphy right now. The Beijing summit begins tomorrow. The generals' meeting happened today. Iran's next move, if there is one, could come at any hour. Hit the notification bell. This story is at its breaking point. Tell me in the comments after today, after the uranium was promised and taken back, after 5 broken deadlines, after China was caught routing weapons to Iran, do you think Trump walks out of Beijing with something that saves this ceasefire? Or has Iran's calculation that Washington will keep folding finally pushed this war past the point of no return?